Hello, Education at 200 and Education 581. Dr. Allen here. No hat today, just the fleece. Thought I might go hatless since I've kind of bummed it out a little bit the last couple weeks with that hat after running. Um, couple things. One, thank you for the patience with me with grading. I've been trying to get through everything with advising and all. I'm not trying to sell a tale of woe. I'm definitely going to try to get caught up. I'm working towards it. Thank you for your patience. I do, when I get a free moment or two, try to jump in and get some things graded in both classes. And hopefully in the next week or two, I should be able to do so. My son's cross country season ended, so I'm thinking I'll be able to sneak or steal an hour or two again in the evening to get into that. Not that I wasn't trying to get them done before or doing them at the races, but it's a little more structured, I guess, with the time change coming up. Also, just an additional sidebar, and this was not required, but anyone who actually took a moment and completed the science fair survey, much appreciated. It's anonymous. I don't even get to see anything. My son kind of handles all that, but I appreciate everyone who took a moment or two to do that. Again, much appreciated. So, with all that being said, I'm going to just go ahead and jump into what we're going to do this week. Don't forget, you have your 10 hours. I know a few people have reached out related to different things as far as tutoring and all. If you have any problems, please contact me as far as reaching anyone. With that being said, I think that was it. But don't forget those 10 hours. The semester's sneaking up, man. I mean, what we're going into the last week of October. This is the last week of October for this online version. Oh, and by the way, I guess I'm looking at this. As you can see, I tried to do a different location today. I'm actually in my kitchen. And there's my laundry room right behind there. But I thought I'd just try this a little for something a little different. Enough about me. You don't care about any of this. You're like, what's the info this week? Well, the info is this. We're going to talk about two things. It's not too brutal of a week. I've tried to kind of tone down in case anyone's trying to get their 10 hours in this week. And of course, last. This week, though, we're going to talk about Vygotsky in the zone of proximal development. I'm not, again, it's going to be sort of like Piaget and stuff. I'm just going to kind of touch in the basic type stuff and then get out, because really you get into a lot of this with 320, but they're names that I want you to start to get a little familiar with. And also, we have a discussion board this week, and I was kind of thinking about this a little bit because I know it could be, I know, especially in 581, some of you are already in the field and working and such, and this is not supposed to be anything to attack them or anything like that, but just an open debate. I guess I'm a social studies teacher. I like these things, and I saw the article. I thought it was kind of interesting. Do teachers unions stymie school improvement? It's been in the news a lot with the pandemic and such, and I'm not going to say one way or the other my own personal opinions because I just kind of want to hear what yours are. And by the way, I should add this. The last few weeks, I wanted to go back. Sorry, I'm thinking on the fly a little bit, but especially 7 and 8. The 21st century skills postings on the Flipgrid were fantastic. I know sometimes I put comments in and they're just kind of like straightforward, like, oh, like that point, or you're right on it, or something like that. But everyone's were well thought out. I really enjoyed listening to those. And actually, sevens, I'm going to jump back just to make sure I don't get the wrong ones. Teacher preparation and such. Again, that was a first, that's a real world one. And again, the ideas were kind of all, some of the opinions are all over the place. And when I mean that in a good way, like everyone's not just trying to agree with everyone else. So, keep up the good work with the flip grids. Being an asynchronous class, that's not always the easiest thing to do. And also, thanks to you all that always send out those reminders. I think I actually remembered this week, but in case I set the timer for a little short on the flip grids, when I'm building them, I'm jumping around. They should be, I think I actually just made them 10 this week, but not that you have to talk that long. But that being said, flip grids have been awesome. So why don't we just go ahead and dive into everything. Here we go. Vygotsky, teachers unions we're going to talk about. The discussion and then the taking sides gets into the teachers unions a little bit, but I'm going to take about 2 or 3 minutes just to kind of highlight a few things. But with that being said, there's no Dewey discussion board this week. We'll come back to that next week. So why don't we just go ahead and look at Vygotsky. And again, like I said, we're just going to look at this from a very basic type setup. Let me get out of that real quick. There he is. Vygotsky. I'm sorry. And I'm going to start. Whoops, there we go. Sorry, I got a little there. That's Vygotsky. So I was having Mac problems. Don't they say not to use Safari when you're using Brightspace? Yet I'm still doing it. Um, he's Russian, if you couldn't tell from the name. He was another psychology person, and you're probably picking up a little bit of a trend with a lot of these. A lot of these guys are in the psych field, and what I mean like that Piaget, even Dewey to an extent, Vygotsky. He dies young. He really started going about 28. He was 38. A lot of his things are. Vygotsky's really gained a lot of steam after the Cold War. I think that is actually on here. He was associated. He is Russian, so again, let me jump ahead here. He was not widely published until after the Cold War because there was a lot of pressure in the old Soviet Union to make his connections linked to Marxism. The Russian government was not always connected to his ideas, which I think is actually kind of interesting because I've been doing a few things on the Cold War, at least from a social studies point of view. And again, it's that whole idea of making those connections. And I'm not going to turn this into a social studies lesson at all, or at least try to eliminate doing that. But the whole idea of that's part of the things of the old Soviet Union. You can control the information, you can control the message, and things like that. And there was certain, there was that status that they had kind of established as far as like where everyone was slotted, and the basic Marxist type beliefs. I'm kind of babbling here a little bit, but the main thing I want you to kind of get out of it is his ideas are still being debated a little bit because quite honestly, the Cold War, I guess we're getting a little removed from it, be what, 10, 30 years ago, but they're still developing. They're not as seasoned, I guess, as someone like Dewey or Piaget or something like that. So there's really going to be one thing if you could just remember the term after all of this, I would be pretty happy. But Vygotsky, he's Russian. He was very much a proponent of thinking that cognitive development was very connected to culture. And he thought that thinking was transformed by tools. And there's different types of tools. And I'm not talking like a hammer or something like that. Obviously, these are psychological tools. These are technological tools, things that can alter the way we think. I mean, I guess what I'm speaking on right now will be a tool. It can alter my education and the way I interpret things. You develop and study through the process of change, which we all go through. And this is, again, we're going to talk about it, but the proximal development. I'm just going to say this, what children can do with assistance better reflects intelligence than what a child can do alone. And this is where Vygotsky is a little different than some of the others. I think it's mentioned on here, but Piaget was all about, if you remember, like doing and, I have this phone. What is this? I'm going to figure it out on my own. And, it's intuitive. Some of us learn better that way. Vygotsky thought that it might be something. Sometimes you need someone that's like, I'm going to say the apprentice master type of thing, or a mentor type aspect. Like if you enter a lot of the vocational fields, there's like you apprentice underneath someone who's a master of that field, so to speak. And that's something that maybe Vygotsky was a little more pro doing. And I think if you can think about it one way, in the classroom, the educator or the teacher or the professor or whoever is supposed to be somewhat of a knowledgeable in that field and can direct that person to kind of get to that next level. And you'll see it when we look at the zone of proximal development. I mentioned this, but some of the tools that Vygotsky was alluding to were technical tools and psychological tools. He was big on language and like how language systems and can control the way we think and the way we use language and the way that it's used to communicate and such. I'm not going to get into that too much, but I will say this. He was big on the cultural thing, as I mentioned. Attitudes, values, customs, and behavioral patterns that characterize a social group have a big influence on education. What is thought about is a big cultural thing. And if you think about it, that is something I think if you step back and think about even our world today, the things that we focus on today are a lot different than even 20, 30 years ago. How skills can be acquired. I was talking to one of my classes the other day. I don't know. I mean, I remember a world without the internet, and we're starting to get farther. Not that I don't think I'm too old, but We're starting to get farther removed though, where, most people have grown up with the internet. I guess I'm trying to think. I've probably had the internet longer than I've not. It's kind of 50-50. Um, how we acquire information, again, that's a lot different now. We get it a lot faster and such, but all of these things just influence learning. And also who's allowed to participate in an activity. So he's kind of looking at things from a bigger social context than people like Dewey and Piaget, at least in my opinion. I'm just kind of repeating myself, but Vygotsky was complex thinking has its roots in social interactions. You learn from socializing, and those interactions expand your thought to, debate and Socratic discourse and things like that. Piaget was definitely more complex thinking as the result of private exploration and study. Vygotsky also thought new skills resulted from guidance by a more skilled person, again, that apprenticeship type thing that I was talking about, who structures the child's learning process. Piaget learning is supported by interactions with peers. So some similarities, but I think Vygotsky's is a little more direct. This is what I wanted to get to. And if you do not take anything out of this babbling mess of mine today, whoa, sorry, my cursor went away. If you don't take anything out of it, it's this. It's the zone of proximal development, or ZDP. It's the range of tasks that an individual can do alone, but can accomplish when assisted. But what they can accomplish more, let me see. Sorry, I got a little bit of a problem. I'm going to jump out here and move that. There we go. That will drive me nuts. Sorry, a little bit of technical difficulty, but I am not going to stop. There we go. ZDP, that was driving me crazy. It's a range of tasks that an individual can not do alone, but can accomplish when assisted by a more skilled partner. And this is what you got to think about in the classroom. Let's just go by the bottom. If you look, it says what students can do by themselves. That's it's standard. Where the zone is as you come up, what students can do with assistance. What can you do in the classroom that you can help students learn? And then you're going to reach a point where what the students cannot even do without the assistance. Think about that when we were talking about the stages of social development and all with students. Maybe, you might reach a cap with a certain age group of what they can do even with assistance. I was thinking about math. My son, obviously I'm sitting here listening. My wife is the math master or expert in our class. But I was sitting at the kitchen table listening to them do their math the other night. And, higher functioning math in middle school, there's going to be a point where even if he's getting help, he can't do it. I mean, I can't do it. So, we all have our point. But with assistance, he was sitting here. My wife was doing an awesome job, and they were just busting out all types of equations and things like that. And he can do it. He just needs her assistance with it. He needs his teacher's assistance with it. He couldn't have just sat down and figured that out on himself. He needed someone to guide him. And that's basically what the zone of proximal development is. He's not going to be doing trigonometry. That might be something that he can't do even with assistance. My wife can set him down and start to recite it and do it, but he's not going to get it. But can he do algebra? Yes. Can he do some geometry? Yes. Things like that. Can he do some algebra too? Possibly. But you just want to get to that point, and that's the zone. I think you can think about it in these 3 steps: what students can do by themselves first, what they can do with assistance, the classroom, what they cannot do even with assistance, probably just getting a little too far advanced. It's not a complex thing, but I think there's a lot of reality in it. It's that scaffolding, assistance by a more skilled person that allows students to complete a task they cannot do independently. As a social studies teacher, if I was thinking about what I want my students to do, if you're thinking your Blooms, which I guess we're going to get into a little bit later this semester, but if you get into Blooms, who talks about things like different levels of learning and the words that we can do and the way we, some things are just memorization. Some students can do the memorization, but in social studies, could they do critical thinking? Can they do analysis? Can they do compare and contrast? Those are all very important things that they need to be able to do in a social studies classroom. And a lot of times they couldn't do that without me posing these questions to bring them to that next level. Whether we were talking about the civil rights movement or we're talking about the French Revolution, they can memorize the main players, but can they debate and see things from different POVs or points of view? that would be, something that I would view myself as trying to get them to that next level. And some things may get too complex just because of life experiences and such. There's different types of scaffolding. There's modeling, thinking aloud, questions, adapting. Socratic method is one that I like. I've kind of started to use a lot more near the end as far as questioning. So, but zone of proximal development, that's the big one. I'll just throw it here. What are some of the contributions of Vygotsky? Teach within each child's zone of proximal development. And I'll have a chart that's posted up on the Brightspace page if you want to check that out a little bit more. Use scaffolding to facilitate learning, different types of ways to build on knowledge. That's basically scaffolding. When you're thinking about scaffolding, think my hands. Boom, 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 boom. Sorry, I heard someone. You might have heard a crack. That was my son upstairs. But it's just building, 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 building. Also, social interaction increases the learning process. We learn from one another. That is definitely a Vygotsky contribution. And that's kind of it. Again, I'm not going to dive too much because you're going to get into this with 320, but I will post up a little chart if you want to check out the zone of proximal development. And if you're going to remember anything from what I just rambled through, Vygotsky, zone of proximal development, what children know on their own, what they can learn with assistance, the cap of what they can learn. That might be the cap for your grade. The next thing I wanted to talk about is just a little bit on teachers' unions, only because your discussion board this week is on teachers' unions. It's the taking sides and do teachers' unions stymie school improvement. I thought of this one when I was prepping for the class. Obviously, this has been in the news a lot because of the pandemic, and there's a lot of debate. And I'm not trying to, I think it's important stuff that we need to talk about, or at least think about. Obviously, a lot of people in this class, if you're in 581, may already be part of a union. May not. Some people are obviously probably going to join the union when they get into teaching education. Some people may decide not to do it. It's all fine. We all make our own decisions and we decide what's right and wrong. But I guess we do. Yeah, we decide what's right and wrong. I think I'll stick with that line. We all have our own paths. But I do think it's kind of important to see both sides because it helps us, it helps us grow. So with that being said, you're going to check out the articles. If you are interested, though, I did put a timeline up, and it's a PBS. PBS has done some cool stuff on education before related to timelines. And you can look. Some of this you watched early on with the ed puzzles, like the Common School era, the Common School, and things like that. But if you scroll on down, you're going to get to these two. There's going to be unions, and I think this one's important, too. I'm not requiring it, but I would really suggest taking about 5-10 minutes and reading this. It talks about the 1890s to the 1910s and the Women's Teachers Rebellion and how that has some roots in the unionization. Because if you remember anything from your U.S. history classes, whether at Shepherd University or in high school, the late 19th century, early 20th century was a time when unions were really starting to get their roots. And as you can see right there, it talks about it. By the turn of the 20th century, 75% of America's teachers were women. And if you know anything about U.S. history, a lot of times those positions that were filled by women were not always, they're not always treated fairly. I don't know how else to say it. The pay is not the same. The conditions are usually horrible. It's just might be in a little bit of an extreme, but if you're familiar with the shirtwaist fire incident that happened, it was a women were working on in a textile mill basically, and it caught on fire, and the conditions were deplorable. Many people died. Again, that kind of gets into these conditions. This is more about extremes and just trying to, make schools better. And a lot of the early leaders in this movement to making schools more powerful were women. So, check this out a little bit because that's kind of where the roots are. And as you can see, there's a lot on there. And this applies both, and because I see the word, even though city schools or urban schools and rural schools had different issues, they also had a lot of the same problems as far as conditions, supplies, pay, getting community help. These are all things that, these early pioneers were fighting for. And if you look in there, they'll get into that a little bit. And then they kind of talk about how that forms into unions. There are two big teachers unions in the United States. There's the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers. It gets into those early roots. The NEA is a little bit older. Actually, it's a good bit older. It's the oldest teacher union. And there's actually been recent talks about, them unifying. I'd have to double check. I never thought that they actually did, because I see materials on both. But, there's always talk about it. And, if you do, just check it out. That's basically what I'm saying. It just gives you a little bit more background. Um, you know, Trying to make schools, I think at the end, whether you're pro union or anti union, I think everyone's end goal is to make schools better. Now, how we do that is probably always going to be up for debate. So, read and try to form your own opinions. And if you look there, actually, progressivism, there's a Dewey quote. So, um, and as it says there, that looks like a good future, maybe just Dewey discussion board, but there's no discussion board this week. But how can a child learn to be free and responsible citizen when the teacher is bound? And again, that gets into maybe the need for these unions in the early 20th century. Enough of me babbling. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water or bubbly here. That's pretty much it for this week. I know I can babble a little bit, so I want to make sure not to take up too much of your time. But I do want to show one thing just to make sure we're on the same page again. Make sure I didn't get rid of that. This week, what you have to do, check out the Vygotsky PowerPoint is posted if you want to check it out. I'm also going to put a chart. I'm in the middle of constructing this a little bit. I'll make sure that there is a chart if you want to check him out a little bit more. I think actually a lot of his ideas are pretty cool. And, check out the teachers union stymie school improvement. And you got discussion board 8, which is the flip grid. And that's the teachers union one, and the link's there. Don't forget your 10 hours out in the field. I'm sure a lot of you have already done it. Don't forget there is a paper assignment with that. The details are on the syllabus, but I'm going to pull it up real quick just to make sure that you know where it is. I think I've done this before, but I like to repeat myself. You scroll right down. There it is, service learning. And you're going to just ask some of the basic questions. There it is. It says Job Corps, Boys and Girls Club. I think I pointed out before, but obviously with the pandemic, that didn't always form. I know some of you are Boys and Girls Club, but Job Corps never happened. It can be 3 pages, but no more than 5. And you just kind of talk about a few things. What have you learned? Did you meet any goals that you set for yourself from prior? Any educational issues? You just kind of address those questions. If you need any help, you're welcome to reach out to me anytime. But other than that, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to give you a wave. Tell everyone, please have a good week. Make sure if you have not contacted your advisor that you have. I'm going to fix my hair there a little bit. It looks a little out of disheveled. Is that what? There, it's still disheveled. Have a good week. Make sure you do talk to your advisors though, and talk to you later.